Next, we come to a story that's part of our ongoing coverage of the effect of COVID-19 on archaeologists and, in this instance, archaeology students in the first instance. With the headline from the BBC on the 4th of November, which is part of a story that really had its beginnings in October. So we're sneaking this in the back door, as it were. But the headline is Mass Exodus of Students is Expected as Lockdown Starts. Now, of course, over the past few months, we have discussed how COVID might affect archaeologists' ability to work, and in this instance, also to learn. Um, are you surprised by this? And also, uh, what should we expect outside the university context as well? I mean, maybe we'll come to that in a moment in terms of workplace security and this kind of thing. Uh, but it's feeling uh, a bit messy, shall we say? A
I
friend of
think it's
mine.
more than sorry, go on.
Well, I was going to say, a friend of mine who teaches at a local university, and actually some other people as well have been in touch to say that they've been getting messages for the past 10 days or so, essentially from students saying, right, we're off, we're going home. Parents have been turning up at university campuses to pick up their kids. And actually in The Guardian, uh, there's a headline here: "Students defy guidance and race home before lockdown in England." This is of course the context, I guess, of this development is the beginning of a national lockdown in England, in addition to other lockdowns that are happening in the other nations of the United Kingdom, which may well see families split up potentially for Christmas. It's a possibility at the moment.
Yeah.
So what do you think of this as a how would you mark it
Well,
on a
I might,
scorecard?
you're asking me to mark the government's homework.
Yeah.
No, look, uh, I think what we're seeing here is the consequences of a government that has been reactive rather than proactive throughout.
Hmm.
I think objectively, the government can be shown to have been behind the curve throughout this.
Hmm.
Um, and some of the solutions that it has tried to put in place, for the most egregious example being track and trace, where the only real result of which is this was billed as the attempt to return the country to normal by making it possible for somebody who thought they had COVID symptoms to be tested, shown to be positive or negative, and if they were shown to be positive, to have their contacts traced throughout the period they might have been infectious, so that the idea being to take the infection out of general circulation and
Mm.
enable everybody else to carry on as normal.
Hmm.
That the execution of that has been absolutely shambolic. I think yesterday the figures was something like around 50% of contacts were actually being traced,
Yes.
and the, the the infection rates have been going up all the time that track and trace has been in place, and the only positive uh, of it appears to be that the private companies that were hired by the government to do it, rather than the professionals in the National Health Service and regional health authorities, have had millions of pounds of contracts.
Yeah. Well,
Now,
and so the upshot is that despite some of these measures being in place, it hasn't actually become that
no,
much safer to go back, for example, to school and
no,
university.
no. And the really dangerous part of this is that, in spite of medical experts and epidemiologists being on record in July and August as saying, look, we need to prepare this properly if universities and schools are going to go back in September,
Mm.
or otherwise they're going to become petri dishes of infection, which is exactly what happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Freshers Week coincided with entire student houses being quarantined, and we discussed that last time in the case of, for example, Manchester University.
Yeah.
Um, and that is, and on top of the panic that drew from government, you had ministers not being able to say that students would be allowed home for Christmas. So,
Mm.
is it surprising that this has happened? No,
No.
the messaging on this has been all over the place, and people just have lost confidence in, I think, in many things that the current government says. And to the extent that, and the justification for discussing an October story now is that the new lockdown was actually announced on October the 31st, in a press conference by Boris Johnson, Prime Minister. which only happened and happened. It was delayed and delayed and delayed all afternoon until they decided they had to run it, or otherwise the BBC would cut away from the Prime Minister to show Strictly Come Dancing. So the story goes. That's how shambolic it was. And the only reason they were holding a press conference on a Saturday like that, unprepared, was the story was leaked to two national newspapers and Robert Peston of ITN.
Yes. Yeah.
And
so, I mean, all of that is fascinating, and obviously you and I, we were happy to geek out about that. All
there is a serious point. There is a serious
well,
point.
there is a serious point. I mean, in so much as what we were asking last month was this inevitable? Was this avoidable? Could, for example, in particular, in that instance, university institutions and the people who dealt with pastoral elements of housing and also just administration, could they have done more to mitigate the effects of what we were seeing? But the thing is, this month, what we're seeing is the context of those institutions, that they're working under an umbrella that's being held by a very shaky hand. And as much as for example, yesterday it was great to hear that for example, the Chancellor is supporting self-employed people like you and I, in fact, as archaeologists.
But not all. We've got to remember the 3 million people who've not had any support since this started.
Precisely, based on whether or not you are, for example, a sole trader or you work for your self-named company.
Absolutely.
There are little nuances in there. As much as that's welcome, it's also very much behind the curve, as you say, and also it seems to be with no small amount of heel dragging. For example, Germany weeks ago announced that they were going to extend their furlough scheme for up to 2 years with reviews every now and then, but certainly up until Easter next year. So the UK government, it feels as though that this is the answer to the question that we were asking last month. That they've created an environment where actually failure is far more likely, and working is that much harder.
I think we're at the stage now when there are massive splits within the country between people who are prepared to follow the government guidance and a number, maybe fewer, but it'll be shown over the next month who aren't. And the expectation, for example, that because Boris Johnson has said this current lockdown will end on the 2nd of December, it won't. And the Chancellor's announcement yesterday only reinforced that suspicion.
And is it just worthwhile clarifying for people who are listening and not watching this that there was a very dry observation there that you're making? But in the context that our Prime Minister loves to be loved or wants to be loved, he also wants to be there for someone who is not giving people bad news. So he's holding on to this notion that it will, 2nd of December, it'll automatically go away. But as you say, the signs are that it may not do that. And therefore, it's quite good fun to say if Johnson says it will, it won't.
And it has to be said, there's a track record. I mean, according to an earlier speech by the Prime Minister back in the late spring, the COVID crisis was going to be over by Christmas.
Yeah.
A bit like World War One, and we all know what happened there.
Yeah, you think we'd learn to stop saying that?
A lot of comms people have been saying, this is a government that was supposed to be brilliant at communication, and they're getting all the basics wrong. You don't promise something that you then don't deliver, because that'll be held against you forevermore.
Yeah.
But anyway, but just to finish on this very, very, very quickly before we move on to archaeology and heritage and the specific area of archaeology and heritage. But I think that there's one other area, and it particularly relates to young people and students, and that is, yes, they're voting with their feet. Yes, their parents are helping them, because one of the things, and I think this is one of the most appalling derelictions of both the government and university bodies, is that they allowed this to happen. They allowed these kids and young people to go back or to go to uni, maybe leave home for the first time, without any of the certainties of this being in place, and particularly without support systems being in place. And the impact on the mental health of young people, and I can speak from personal experience of this, of what this is doing to their worldview, to their ability to grow and relate to friends and family, but particularly to build their wider relationships with their peers, is really, really damaging.
Yes.
And they're also I think there's also they're becoming really, really cynical as well, because again, I've heard people say that we are being blamed for something that's not our fault. The government was blaming the rising infection rates on students and young people going out and partying and going to the pub and having house parties and not following the rules.
Yeah.
Shifting the blame all the time.
But
And that
also,
is being
simultaneously saying there's no evidence that the disease is spread amongst young
and
people, and
going to the
therefore
pub
we
is
should.
perfectly safe and
Yeah.
going to absolutely. Yeah, that's what I was saying. The messaging has been all over the shop.
Yeah, complete mess. Yeah.
And then there's been blame shifting as well. So the government is reaping what it sowed. Unfortunately, the innocent bystanders in this, I think, are the students and staff who are being made, who, for example, were made to stay in uni for maybe one hour tutorial a week face to face. They were told they had to maintain face to face contact with their students.
Yeah.
I mean, it's farcical.
Yeah.
It's real. It was, and it was just matter. It was using people to try and pretend everything was okay when they knew darn well it wasn't.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting angry here.
No. I agree.
It's
I agree. I think it feels very much as though, in that sense, the context of higher education is a very useful, not only canary down the mine shaft, but also it's something that now, in the post Blair era, an awful lot of people are exposed to. Lots of families who decades ago wouldn't have been going to university now have children who are going to university.
around 50% of kids go to some form of higher education.
Precisely, yeah, around 50%, and therefore it's actually a really good way of, if you are trying to demonstrate that life is getting back to normal, it's a really good way of signalling that. And in that sense, it not only, there's the university been used as a test bed, as in a petri dish as well. It's also been used as a political football, and our friends and colleagues and also family members are suffering for it.
Yes.
I mean, so I feel as though this pairs up nicely with last month's segment on that. But in the context of industry specific guidance, yesterday I went to our sainted Chartered Institute for Archaeologists website, CIFA's website, to see what their latest guidance was on COVID-19. Looking at their Twitter feed, there's very little. In fact, nothing in recent days, not even an acknowledgement that the English national lockdown is coming into effect. And their site working in the UK and COVID-19 advice has not been updated since May. It says here as of the 10th of May. So, there's not much guidance or leadership going on there, despite the fact that, interestingly enough, a tweet from let's see, it's more recent than 43 minutes ago, seemingly. Oh no, it's 4 hours ago. Says that CIFA, Prospect Arcs, and Fame Arc work closely together on the industry working group to collect and share information about matters affecting working practices across the industry, especially pay and working conditions. Find out more here, and then they link elsewhere. So CIFA, as we were discussing in the context of maybe your ire in particular yesterday, CIFA want the prestige of being an influential body and voice in our sector, but don't necessarily want to do the day-to-day groundwork of updating guidance. Of course, I'm observing that as an individual. I'm not saying that's both of our opinion.
Look,
it's a bit frustrating.
Look, we've discussed CIFA many times before, and it does many good things.
Yes.
And in particular in the areas of laying down at least professional standards. But I think, and I have to say, I'm not a member. I'm an outside observer. I did once consider joining CIFA, but actually, at the time, in the end, it wasn't actually necessary for what I do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think now as well, particularly because I do what I do now, there's an element of the Groucho Marx. I wouldn't want to belong to a club that would have me as a member.
Also,
Um,
frankly, the cost as well. There's a cost
the
there that
cost as well. Well, this is
yeah.
and this is the thing. But I think the problem that we're drilling down into here is actually that although it has laid down a very strong, apparently strong framework for professional archaeology
Hmm.
that is particularly applicable to the commercial sector, although it's trying to diversify its reach. But there's always been a suspicion that the proposition of commercial archaeology was the most important thing in the eyes of CIFA.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but fair or not, I'm just throwing that out there
As a characterization that
as
exists.
a characterization that does exist in the public domain.
Hmm.
I think what we're talking about here is resourcing.
Yeah.
The nearest equivalent to CIFA really, if they're looking at you look at things like chartered institutions like the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, the Royal Institute of British Architects,
Hmm.
the various Royal Colleges of Nursing, Royal College of Medicine, and so on, who oversee professional standards, but also intervene actively in disputes
Yeah.
and in framing guidelines, and sometimes very outspokenly,
Yeah.
because they've got mass memberships and they've got the money from the subscriptions from those memberships to actually employ people to do the lobbying and the research and the updating of the social media on full time. CIFA doesn't have that.
Well, and also in that sense, the other thing as well that one would hope for from them is advocacy with regarding paying conditions and
Yes.
workplace safety and this kind of thing. And
And
yes,
I
okay.
think,
Well,
suspicion is again because that perception that they're tied too much to the commercial sector
uh,
is that they're afraid to say boo to the potential employers, because the potential employers could just say, actually, it's not a legal requirement that we have a qualified archaeologist on site. We can just get somebody who can handle a spade.
and yet, my argument is that it's all about how they frame it. There, for example, we highlighted or came up to the realization yesterday, sorry, and we're highlighting it now, that it's been left to the sun. In absence of advice, one of the places you can go to for advice that's compatible, broadly speaking, with commercial archaeology is in the Sun, with the headline "Hard Graft: Can construction workers and builders work during the second coronavirus lockdown?" Written by Sarah Benwell and Levi Winchester. Um, and this was first published in March 2020, updated 3rd of November 2020.
Yeah.
Yes, so yesterday after, no, sorry, a couple of afternoons ago, and they go through explaining what builders can and can't do, explaining what they should and shouldn't expect from their employees and on-site safety and so on and so forth. They lay it out with a few bullet points, and it's relevant, and it's been updated. They didn't have to write a whole new article,
No.
and I guess that is kind of all I would hope CIFA would be able to do, would be able to just update, even if it was just to put in an ellipsis on the page, make it clear
Yeah.
that this advice is still relevant
Yeah.
and will still be helpful for you as an archaeologist trying to continue to work in a very fraught and in some cases dangerous working environment.
And in fact, here we can link back to the the pressure on schools and universities to go back to work.
Mm,
The government has been explicit in this lockdown that construction is expected to continue.
yes, yes,
So, yeah.
and so I would argue that CIFA should have had something to say about that.
You might say that. I couldn't possibly comment. I'm an objective journalist.
I am a private citizen and an archaeologist. I'm happy. I'm happy to say that. Uh,